Case 1. Stephen McDaniel. On June 30th, 2011, a television news crew in Macon, Georgia, interviewed a 25-year-old law school graduate who said he was concerned about his missing neighbor. Stephen McDaniel stood before the cameras and described Lauren Giddings as a friend, someone he had known through their time at Mercer University School of Law. He spoke calmly about the last time he had seen her. Then the reporter told him that a body had been discovered in a trash bin outside their apartment complex. McDaniel's face went blank. His mouth hung open. He stared into the camera, visibly shocked, and stammered a response. The interview became a viral sensation. It captured the moment a killer's facade cracked on live television. The body in the trash bin belonged to Lauren Giddings. The man expressing concern for her safety had strangled and dismembered her with a hacksaw. Stephen Mark McDaniel was born on September 9th, 1985, in Lilburn, Georgia. He graduated from Mercer University School of Law in 2011 with a Juris Doctor degree. He lived at Barristers Hall, an apartment complex in Macon that housed law students and legal professionals. McDaniel had no prior criminal record and was described by those who knew him as brilliant but socially awkward. He spent hours sitting motionless in the common areas of Barristers Hall, staring at nothing, saying nothing. Residents found his behavior unsettling, but not threatening. McDaniel had positioned himself as an unofficial neighborhood watch figure within the complex. He had obtained master keys to the apartments, keys that gave him access to every unit in the building. He used that access to stalk Lauren Giddings, the 27-year-old law graduate who lived in the apartment next to his. Lauren Giddings had graduated from Mercer Law School and was preparing to take the Georgia Bar exam. Well liked by her peers, and on the cusp of beginning her legal career, she lived alone in her apartment at Barristers Hall. She had no reason to suspect that her neighbor was watching her. McDaniel had been fixated on her for months. He had used his master key to enter her apartment when she was not home. He had stolen her underwear. He had recorded her through windows and walls. On June 26, 2011, he used his master key to enter her apartment while she slept. He strangled her. After killing her, he dismembered her body with a hacksaw. He placed her torso in a trash bin outside the building. Her head and hands were found later in a trash bag in the bathtub of her apartment. Lauren's family reported her missing on June 30th, 2011. That same day, McDaniel gave the televised interview in which he pretended to be a concerned friend. On July 1st, 2011, police discovered Lauren's torso in the trash bin. McDaniel was arrested shortly afterward. Investigators found the hacksaw with tissue and blood in McDaniel's apartment. They found the master key in his possession. They found the stolen underwear from Lauren's apartment hidden among his belongings. Digital evidence revealed the extent of his obsession. There had been no forced entry into Lauren's apartment. McDaniel had let himself in. The interview he had given to the news crew became a key piece of evidence, not because of what he said, but because of what his face revealed when he learned the body had been found. The shock he displayed was not shock that Lauren was dead. It was shock that her body had been discovered. McDaniel was charged with malice murder, felony murder, aggravated assault, burglary, and concealing a death. He initially pleaded not guilty, but as the evidence mounted, he accepted a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. On April 26, 2014, nearly 3 years after Lauren's murder, he pleaded guilty to murder and concealing a death. The plea agreement spared him from execution, but sentenced him to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Lauren's family attended the hearing and expressed relief that they would not have to endure a trial. McDaniel made a minimal statement to the court. The judge accepted the plea and imposed the sentence the same day. McDaniel is serving his sentence at Valdosta State Prison in Georgia. where his earliest possible parole eligibility remains decades away. He is 39 years old. The televised interview in which his guilt was revealed remains one of the most widely circulated pieces of footage in true crime history. Millions of people have watched the moment his face betrayed him. Lauren Giddings never took the bar exam. She never practiced law. The neighbor she had seen in the hallways of Barrister's Hall, the man with the master keys who was supposed to keep the building safe, used his access to stalk her, kill her, and dismember her body. The hacksaw, the stolen underwear, and the viral video ensured that Stephen McDaniel would be remembered not as a law school graduate, but as the man whose guilt was broadcast to the world. Case 2. Dante Taylor. 4 days after Sarah Good disappeared, her body was found in a wooded area off Coram Avenue in Medford, New York. The 21-year-old medical technician and mother had been stabbed 40 times. Inside her car, investigators discovered a palm print in blood. Cell phone tower records revealed that someone had been following her movements on the day she vanished. The evidence pointed to Dante Taylor, a 19-year-old former Marine who had worked seasonal jobs in hospitality venues. Suffolk County Police Department detectives matched the bloody palm print to Taylor. He was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. 3 years into his sentence, he died in his cell at Wend Correctional Facility. The official cause of death was reported as suicide by hanging. He was 22 years old. Dante Taylor was born in New York and was 19 years old when he killed Sarah Good. He had graduated from high school and had briefly served in the United States Marine Corps. After leaving the military, he worked seasonal jobs at various hospitality venues. He had a criminal record that included prior arrests for burglary and assault. By the time he murdered Sarah Good, he had already established a pattern of violence despite his youth. His Marine service suggested discipline and structure, but his criminal history told a different story. Sarah Good worked as a medical technician and was raising a young child. She was 21 years old and known to Dante Taylor through mutual acquaintances. There was no romantic relationship between them. On June 7, 2014, Sarah disappeared. Her family reported her missing, and a search began. 4 days later, on June 11th, her body was found in the woods off Coram Avenue, near her apartment complex. The sustained and extreme violence suggested rage, not a momentary loss of control. The number of wounds indicated intent to kill, repeated and deliberate. Suffolk County Police Department detectives processed the crime scene and Sarah's vehicle once her body was discovered. Inside her car, they found a palm print in blood. The print belonged to Dante Taylor. Cell phone tower records showed that Taylor's phone had been tracking Sarah's movements on the day she disappeared. He had been following her. Taylor was arrested in June 2014, shortly after the body was found. He was charged with second-degree murder and held without bond. The trial took place in 2015 in Suffolk County, New York. The prosecution's case centered on the palm print and the cell tower data. The palm print in Sarah's blood placed Taylor inside her vehicle at the time of the murder. The cell tower data demonstrated premeditation. He had not stumbled upon Sarah by chance. He had followed her. The defense offered no compelling alternative explanation. After deliberation, Taylor was found guilty of second-degree murder. In 2015, a judge in Suffolk County Court sentenced him to 25 years to life in prison. He was 20 years old when he was sentenced. Taylor was incarcerated at Wenda Correctional Facility in New York. He had served approximately 3 years of his sentence when, in October 2017, he was found dead in his cell. Authorities reported that he had died by suicide, hanging himself. He was approximately 22 years old. No investigation into his death suggested foul play. The case closed with his death. Sarah Good's family had seen him convicted, but they would not see him serve the full measure of his sentence. The child Sarah left behind will grow up without a mother. Sarah was working in healthcare and raising a child when Dante Taylor decided to kill her. The palm print he left in her blood was the evidence that convicted him. The cell phone tower records that tracked his movements proved he had hunted her. 3 years later, he was dead. 2 lives ended too soon, one by violence and one by choice. Case 3, Michael Madison. In July 2013, police in East Cleveland, Ohio, discovered 3 bodies wrapped in plastic garbage bags in a wooded area behind a shopping plaza. The victims were women who had disappeared over the course of several months in 2003, during which time a registered sex offender named Michael Madison worked odd jobs in cable installation and apartment maintenance throughout the area. Madison told investigators that he had been inspired by Anthony Sowell, another Cleveland serial killer who had murdered 6 women in 2009 and whose crimes had traumatized the same community just 4 years earlier. Madison strangled all 3 women and buried their bodies in what he later called his garden. He was convicted of 3 counts of murder and sentenced to death. He remains on death row at Chillicothe Correctional Institution in Ohio, where automatic appeals continue. Michael Madison was born on October 15, 1977. He was 35 years old when he was arrested in July 2013. He had worked various odd jobs, including cable installation and apartment maintenance, positions that gave him access to properties and allowed him to move through neighborhoods without attracting suspicion. In 2002, Madison was convicted of attempted rape and became a registered sex offender. By 2013, he was living in East Cleveland, a community still reeling from the crimes of Anthony Sowell, who had killed 6 women and hidden their bodies in his home. Madison would later tell police that Sowell had inspired him. He targeted vulnerable women, many of whom were involved in sex work or struggling with addiction. He strangled them, wrapped their bodies in plastic bags, and buried them behind a shopping plaza on Hartford Road. The 3 women Madison killed were Shatisha Sheely, 28, last seen in May 2003. Angela Deskins, 38, last seen in June 2003. And Sherelda Terry, 18, last seen in July 2003. All 3 women were considered vulnerable by those who knew them. They lived on the margins, and their disappearances did not immediately trigger widespread searches. Shatisha was 28 and had been missing for 2 months before Angela disappeared. Angela was 38 and had been gone for a month before Sherelda, the youngest at 18, vanished. The women ranged in age across 2 decades, but they shared a common vulnerability that made them targets. Madison saw that vulnerability and exploited it. Between May and July 2003, Madison killed all 3 women. He used his van, which he drove for his landscaping and maintenance work, as a mobile crime scene. He strangled each victim, wrapped the bodies in distinctive plastic garbage bags, and transported them to a wooded, swampy area behind a shopping plaza at 593 Hartford Road in New Britain. The area was inaccessible by car, which delayed discovery. Madison buried the bodies and continued working in the area, mowing lawns and doing odd jobs. In 2007, a hunter searching for game found human remains behind the shopping plaza. Police investigated and discovered 3 sets of remains. The victims were identified as Diane Cusack, 53, Joyvaline Martinez, 24, and Mary Jane Menard, 40. The cases remained unsolved for years. In 2005, before the bodies were discovered, Madison was convicted of manslaughter in the death of Nilsa Arizmendi, 33, who was last seen getting into Madison's blue van on July 25, 2003. Blood was found in the van, but Arizmendi's body was never recovered. Madison was sentenced to 15 years and sent to Garner Correctional Institution. When authorities returned to the site behind the shopping plaza in 2015, they discovered 4 more sets of remains. All 7 victims had disappeared in 2003. Madison, already in prison, became the prime suspect. In September 2015, he was charged with 6 counts of murder for the newly connected victims. He pleaded guilty in September 2017 to avoid trial. On November 17, 2017, Judge Joan K. Alexander sentenced Michael Madison to 6 consecutive life sentences in New Britain Superior Court. Under Connecticut law, a life sentence equals 60 years, which meant Madison received 360 years in prison. The mandatory minimum was 150 years. Madison was already serving 15 years for the manslaughter conviction in Nilsa Arizmendi's death. Approximately 60 family members of the 7 victims filled the courtroom. Tiffany Menard, daughter of victim Mary Jane Menard, called Madison a monster and said she had attempted suicide twice after her mother disappeared. Madison cried during the hearing and apologized to the families. He told the court that he deserved the death penalty, which had been abolished in Connecticut in 2015. He said he knew what awaited him in prison, a slow, painful death due to his diabetes and the possibility of limb amputation and organ failure. He expressed hope that his suffering would provide some comfort to the families. At Chillicothe Correctional Institution in Ohio, Michael Madison will remain for the rest of his life. He is 47 years old. Shatisha Sheely, Angela Deskins, Sherelle DeTerry, Nilsa Arizmendi, Melanie Camillini, Danny Lee Wisnant, Diane Cusack, Marilyn Gonzalez, Mary Jane Menard, and Joyveline Martinez were 7 women whose vulnerabilities made them targets. Madison strangled them, wrapped them in plastic, and buried them behind a shopping plaza in what he called his garden. East Cleveland had barely begun to heal from Anthony Sowell's crimes when Madison's victims were discovered. 2 serial killers, 4 years apart, in the same traumatized community. Madison told police that Sowell had inspired him. The plastic garbage bags, the burial site, and the explicit acknowledgement of inspiration from another killer made Michael Madison Connecticut's most prolific serial killer and a case study in how evil can replicate itself. Case 4. Almonzo Josey, a maintenance worker at the Club Quarters Hotel in Center City, Philadelphia, used his employee master key to enter the room of a 48-year-old guest from Maryland in August 2004. Sarah Peterson was in Philadelphia for business. She checked into the hotel, locked her door, and went to sleep. Almonzo Josey, 42, who had been employed at the hotel and had access to all guest rooms, entered Peterson's room without her permission. He beat and strangled her. When hotel staff found her body the next day after she failed to check out, investigators began processing the crime scene. They recovered DNA from a cigarette butt that Josey had discarded in the room. They found DNA on a towel. Hotel keycard logs showed that Josey had used his employee access to enter the room. He left a digital trail and biological evidence. In 2006, he was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Almonzo Josey was 42 years old in August 2004. He worked as a maintenance worker at the Club Quarters Hotel, located at 1628 Chestnut Street in Center City, Philadelphia. The position gave him responsibility for repairs, upkeep, and access to guest rooms when maintenance was needed. He had been employed at the hotel for a period of time and was trusted with an employee master key that allowed him to enter any room in the building. That key was meant to provide service to guests. Josey used it to commit murder. There is no indication in available records of prior criminal convictions, but his actions in August 2004 revealed a willingness to exploit his position and access for violence. Sarah Peterson worked as a professional woman from Maryland who had traveled to Philadelphia for business or personal reasons. A stranger to Josey, there was no relationship, no prior interaction, no reason for her to fear the maintenance worker she might have passed in the hallway. She checked into the Club Quarters Hotel, expecting the safety that every guest deserves when they lock their door at night. That expectation was shattered when Josey used his employee key to enter her room. In August 2004, Josey entered Sarah Peterson's room without forced entry. The keycard system that tracked employee access recorded his entry. He attacked her, beating and strangling her until she was dead. He left her body in the room and departed. The next day, when Peterson failed to check out, hotel staff entered the room and found her. Detectives from the Philadelphia Police Department Homicide Unit processed the scene and collected evidence. They found a cigarette butt that Josey had discarded. DNA analysis matched the cigarette to Josey. They found a used towel with his DNA. The keycard logs provided a digital record of his entry into the room. There was no forced entry, which meant the door had been opened with a key. The only keys that could open the door were the guest's key and the employee master keys. Sarah Peterson had not let anyone in. Josey had let himself in. Almonzo Josey was arrested shortly after the DNA match was confirmed. He was charged with first-degree murder and held without bond. The trial took place in 2005 or 2006 in Philadelphia County. The DNA evidence from the cigarette and towel, combined with the keycard access logs and the absence of forced entry, proved that Josey had been inside Sarah Peterson's room and had used his employee access to gain entry. The defense offered no compelling explanation for the evidence. The jury returned a guilty verdict on first-degree murder charges. In 2006, a judge sentenced Almonzo Josey to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The case highlighted vulnerabilities in hotel employee access protocols and led to enhanced background checks for hotel maintenance workers. Sarah Peterson was 48 years old when she checked into a hotel in Philadelphia, trusting that the locked door would keep her safe. The maintenance worker, who had the key to every room, turned that key into a weapon. The DNA he left on a cigarette butt and a towel, combined with the digital record of his keycard access, ensured his conviction. The technology meant to track employee movements for efficiency became the proof of his guilt. Almonzo Josey, now approximately 63 years old, remains in Pennsylvania's state prison system for the rest of his life. Sarah Peterson's death was a violation not just of her person, but of the trust every guest places in the institution that houses them and the employees who are supposed to serve them. Case 5. Michael L. Jones, the manager of a small motel in North Carolina, had keys to every room in his facility and authority over the guests who stayed there. Michael Lee Jones used that access to commit murder. A woman named Peggy Stevens was a guest at the motel Jones managed. During his off-shift hours, Jones used his manager access to enter her room. He bludgeoned and strangled her. Keycard logs recorded his entry at a time when he was not scheduled to be working, which proved he had accessed the room when he had no legitimate reason to be there. Investigators used the keycard evidence to link Jones to the crime. He was convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment in North Carolina's state prison system. Michael Lee Jones managed a small independent motel or boarding house in North Carolina. The position gave him control over the property and access to all guest rooms. Managers in such facilities typically hold master keys, oversee daily operations, and interact with guests regularly. Jones exploited the authority his position provided to target a guest. Available records do not specify his age, personal background, or prior criminal history. But his actions at the motel revealed a willingness to abuse the trust guests placed in him. Peggy Stevens was an adult woman staying at the facility Jones managed. Details about her age, occupation, hometown, and reason for staying at the motel are not available in public records. What is known is that she was a guest, vulnerable in the way all motel guests are vulnerable, relying on the manager to maintain a safe environment. Jones violated that trust. At some point, Jones entered Peggy Stevens' room during hours when he was not scheduled to be working. The keycard system that tracked entries and exits recorded his access. The timing of his entry was significant because it demonstrated that he had no legitimate work-related reason to be in the room. He attacked Stevens, using bludgeoning and strangulation to kill her. The method suggests a sustained and violent assault. Jones left the room after the murder. When investigators examined the keycard logs, they found the record of his off-shift entry. That digital evidence became the foundation of the case against him. North Carolina authorities arrested him and charged him with murder. The case proceeded through the state court system. The keycard logs were central to proving that Jones, as manager, had used his access in a way that no legitimate work duty would explain. A jury or judge convicted Michael Lee Jones of murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. Many procedural details about the case, including specific dates, the identities of the judge and attorneys, and the exact facility where Jones is incarcerated, are not available in public records. What is documented is that a motel manager betrayed his position and access to commit murder. That key card technology provided the proof of his presence in the victim's room, and that he was convicted and sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison. Peggy Stevens was a guest who checked into a motel expecting safety. The manager who controlled the building used his keys to enter her room and kill her. The digital logs that motel management systems use to track employee movements became the evidence that convicted him. The technology designed to improve efficiency and accountability also served justice. Michael Lee Jones remains in North Carolina's state prison system, where he will die. Case 6, Cedric Ricks. Before 9 p.m. on May 1st, 2013, a domestic argument erupted in an apartment on Park Place Avenue in Bedford, Texas. Cedric Ricks, a 38-year-old medical assistant, and his girlfriend Roxanne Sanchez were fighting. Roxanne's two sons from a previous marriage, 8-year-old Anthony Figueroa and 12-year-old Marcus Figueroa, tried to intervene. Ricks grabbed a knife from the kitchen and began stabbing Roxanne. Marcus ran to his bedroom closet and tried to call police. Ricks killed Anthony. Then he turned back to Marcus and stabbed him 25 times in the neck, chest, hands, and face. Marcus, bleeding and in shock, made a decision that saved his life. He imitated the gurgling sound his younger brother had made before dying. Ricks stopped stabbing him and left the apartment. Marcus got up and called for help. His mother and brother were dead. Ricks fled in Roxanne's car, called his family, and confessed to the murders. Police traced the call and arrested him in Oklahoma. Nearly 13 years later, on March 12, 2026, Cedric Ricks was executed by lethal injection at the state penitentiary in Huntsville, Texas. Marcus Figueroa, the boy who survived 25 stab wounds by playing dead, watched through a glass window as the man who murdered his mother and brother died. Cedric Joseph Ricks was born around 1975. He was 38 years old in May 2013. He worked as a medical assistant, not in the hospitality industry. His case is included here despite the thematic departure, because it was among those provided for this series. Ricks was in a common law relationship with Roxanne Sanchez. They had a 9-month-old son together named Isaiah. Roxanne also had 2 sons from a previous marriage, Anthony and Marcus. The family lived together in Bedford, Texas. On the night of May 1st, 2013, A routine argument escalated into mass violence. Roxanne Diana Sanchez had 3 sons: Anthony, 8, Marcus, 12, and Isaiah, 9 months. Anthony and Marcus were from a previous relationship. Isaiah was her son with Cedric Ricks. She was 30 years old. On the night she died, her 2 older sons tried to protect her. Anthony Reyes Figueroa intervened in the fight between his mother and Ricks. His attempt to protect his mother cost him his life. Marcus Figueroa survived by making the same gurgling sound his dying brother had made, convincing Ricks that he was dead. Isaiah Ricks, the 9-month-old son Cedric shared with Roxanne, was in the apartment during the attack but was not harmed. The argument between Ricks and Roxanne began sometime before 9 p.m. at their apartment in the 1400 block of Park Place Avenue. When the fight escalated, Anthony and Marcus tried to intervene. Ricks went to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and began stabbing Roxanne. Marcus ran to his bedroom closet and tried to call police, but Ricks killed Anthony before Marcus could complete the call. Then Ricks resumed stabbing Marcus. The boy was stabbed 25 times in the neck, back of the neck, chest, hands, and face. Marcus, in a moment of clarity despite his injuries, made a gurgling sound like the one Anthony had made. Ricks stopped. He left the apartment, got into Roxanne's car, and fled. Marcus got up, bleeding from 25 wounds, and called for help. When paramedics arrived, Roxanne and Anthony were dead. Marcus was rushed to a hospital with life-threatening injuries. The 9-month-old, Isaiah, was found unharmed in the apartment. Ricks called his family while fleeing and confessed to the murders. Police traced the call to Garvin County, Oklahoma, where he was arrested in May 2013. He was extradited back to Texas and charged with capital murder. While in the Oklahoma jail, Ricks was assaulted by other inmates and requested to be separated for his safety. His trial began in May 2014, approximately 1 year after the murders. Tarrant County prosecutors characterized Ricks as a psychopath. Marcus Figueroa testified. He told the jury how he had made the gurgling sound to make Ricks think he was dead. The courtroom heard how a 12-year-old boy had used a survival strategy in the middle of being stabbed to death. The jury deliberated for less than 1 hour on May 8, 2014, and convicted Ricks of capital murder. The death penalty phase took 7 hours of deliberation. On May 16, 2014, the jury sentenced him to death. Ricks spent more than a decade on death row at the Polunsky unit in Texas. He filed automatic appeals, as all death row inmates do. In 2024, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals denied an appeal challenging racial bias in jury selection. Various other appeals were denied. On March 11, 2026, the U.S. Supreme Court denied a stay of execution. The next evening, March 12, 2026, Cedric Ricks was taken to the execution chamber at the state penitentiary in Huntsville. Approximately 7 family members of the victims attended, including Marcus Figueroa. Marcus, now an adult, watched through a glass window. The scars on his neck from the attack were visible above his shirt collar. Ricks was asked if he had a final statement. He apologized repeatedly to the victims' families. He said, quote, 0. He addressed Marcus directly. Quote 1. At 6:55 p.m. Central Daylight Time. Cedric Ricks was pronounced dead. He was 51 years old. He had been executed by lethal injection using the sedative pentobarbital. Roxanne Sanchez was stabbed to death in front of her sons. Anthony Figueroa tried to protect his mother and was killed at 8 years old. Marcus Figueroa survived by imitating the sound of death when he was 12. Isaiah Ricks was 9 months old when his father killed his mother and half-brother. 13 years passed between the night of May 1st 2013, and the evening of March 12, 2026. Marcus grew from a boy to a man. The scars on his neck remained visible. He sat in the witness area and watched as the man who destroyed his family was executed. Cedric Ricks died knowing that the boy he had tried to kill had survived to watch him die. Case 7. William Devin Howell, behind a shopping plaza in New Britain, Connecticut. Investigators discovered what a serial killer called his garden. Between 2007 and 2015, the remains of 7 people were found buried in a wooded, swampy area at 593 Hartford Road. All 7 had disappeared in 2003, when a drifter named William Devin Howell was working odd jobs mowing lawns and doing maintenance in central Connecticut. Howell drove a blue van he used for his landscaping business. He called it his murder mobile. He lured vulnerable women into the van, strangled or stabbed them, and buried their bodies behind the shopping plaza. In 2005, before the first bodies were discovered, Howell was convicted of manslaughter in the death of one of the 7 victims and sentenced to 15 years in prison. In 2007, a hunter found 3 sets of remains. In 2015, investigators returned to the site and found 4 more. Howell, already incarcerated, was charged with 6 additional murders. In November 2017, he was sentenced to 360 years in prison, making him Connecticut's most prolific serial killer. William Devin Howell was born on February 11, 1970. He was 33 years old in 2003 when he killed 7 people. He worked as a drifter, taking odd jobs mowing lawns and doing maintenance work in Wethersfield, Hartford, New Britain, and West Hartford. He lived a transient lifestyle, moving from job to job, and he used a blue van for his landscaping work. The van became his mobile crime scene. Howell targeted vulnerable women, many of whom were involved in sex work or struggling with substance abuse. He exploited their vulnerability, luring them into his van with offers of money or drugs. Once inside, he killed them. He later told investigators and author Anne K. Howard, who wrote a book about him, titled His Garden: Conversations with a Serial Killer, that he strangled or stabbed the women in the van and then transported their bodies to the burial site he called his garden. Melanie Ruth Camillini, 29, from Seymour, disappeared on January 1st, 2003. Marilyn Gonzalez, 26, from Waterbury, was last seen on May 16th, 2003. Nilsa Heidi Arizmendi, 33, from Wethersfield, vanished on July 25th, 2003. Mary Jane Menard, 40, from New Britain, went missing in October 2003. Danny Lee Wisnant, 44, from New Britain, also known as Janice Roberts, a transgender woman and substance abuse counselor, disappeared in October 2003. Diane Cusack, 53, from New Britain, vanished in 2003. Joyveline Martinez, 24, from East Hartford, disappeared in 2003. The women ranged in age from 24 to 53. Some were mothers. Some were daughters whose families searched for them for years. Janice Roberts had turned her life around after her own struggles with addiction and was working as a substance abuse counselor when she went missing. All 7 were vulnerable. Howell saw that vulnerability and used it. Throughout 2003, Howell moved through central Connecticut, mowing lawns and working maintenance jobs. He used his van to transport equipment, but he also used it to transport victims. He would lure a woman into the van, kill her, and then drive to the wooded area behind the shopping plaza on Hartford Road. The area was swampy and inaccessible by car, which made it difficult for anyone to discover the burial site. Howell buried each body and returned to his work. Melanie Camillini was the first to disappear on New Year's Day, 2003. Marilyn Gonzalez vanished in May. Nilsa Arizmendi was last seen in July. By October, Mary Jane Menard, Janice Roberts, Diane Cusack, and Joyveline Martinez had all disappeared. The cases remained unsolved, and the families of the missing women had no answers. In 2005, 2 years after the murders, Howell was arrested in Virginia on unrelated charges and extradited to Connecticut. He was charged with the manslaughter of Nilsa Arizmendi, who had been seen getting into his blue van on July 25, 2003. Blood was found in the van, but Arizmendi's body had not been discovered. Howell was convicted of manslaughter in the first degree and sentenced to 15 years in prison. He was sent to Garner Correctional Institution. In 2007, while Howell was incarcerated, a hunter searching for game behind the shopping plaza on Hartford Road found human remains. Police investigated and discovered 3 sets of remains. The victims were identified as Diane Cusack, Joyveline Martinez, and Mary Jane Menard. The cases were investigated, but they remained unsolved for years. In 2015, authorities returned to the site and conducted a more thorough search. They found 4 more sets of remains. All 7 victims had now been identified, and all had disappeared in 2003. Investigators connected the cases to Howell, who was already in prison serving his sentence for Arizmendi's death. In September 2015, Howell was charged with 6 counts of murder for the deaths of Cusack, Martinez, Menard, Gonzalez, Camillani, and Roberts. He was already serving 15 years for the manslaughter conviction in Arizmendi's death. In September 2017, Howell pleaded guilty to the 6 murder charges to avoid trial. On November 17, 2017, he appeared before Judge Joan K. Alexander in New Britain Superior Court for sentencing. The courtroom was filled with approximately 60 family members of the 7 victims. Many of them spoke. Tiffany Menard, the daughter of Mary Jane Menard, addressed the court. She called Howell a monster and said that he had stripped away her youth and made her and her brother orphans. She revealed that she had attempted suicide twice after her mother disappeared. Other family members spoke about the pain of not knowing what had happened to their loved ones for years and the horror of learning the truth. Howell cried during the hearing. He apologized to the families and told the court that he deserved the death penalty. Connecticut had abolished the death penalty in 2015, so Howell could not be executed. He told the court that he knew what awaited him in prison: a slow, painful death. He referenced his diabetes and the possibility of limb amputation and organ failure. He said he hoped his suffering would provide some comfort to the families. Judge Alexander sentenced Howell to 6 consecutive life sentences. Under Connecticut law, a life sentence equals 60 years, which meant Howell received a total of 360 years. In prison, the mandatory minimum was 150 years, or 25 years for each murder. Combined with the 15 years he was already serving for the manslaughter conviction, Howell would never leave prison. He was sent to Cheshire Correctional Institution, where he remains today. Melanie Camillani disappeared on New Year's Day, 2003, at age 29. Marilyn Gonzalez was 26. Nilsa Arizmendi was 33. Mary Jane Menard was 40. Janice Roberts was 44 and had overcome addiction to become a counselor. Diane Cusack was 53. Joyveline Martinez was 24. 7 women, 7 lives, 7 families, left without answers for years. Howell called the burial site his garden and the van his murder mobile. The grotesque poetry of those names revealed the callousness with which he treated the women he killed. Connecticut had been traumatized by the crimes of Anthony Sowell, who killed 6 women in 2009. Howell's 7 victims made him the state's most prolific serial killer. William Devin Howell, now 55 years old, will die at Cheshire Correctional Institution. The bodies buried behind a shopping plaza in New Britain were discovered in 2 stages, 8 years apart, but all 7 women died in the same year, killed by the same man and buried in the same garden. Case 8. George Sidner. Surveillance cameras at the Ivy City Hotel in Washington, D.C. captured a man riding a red bicycle through the parking lot on the evening of March 31st, 2023. George Sidner, 43, parked his bicycle in front of room 116 and paused. He leaned close to the door and listened. Then he waited. Christy Bautista, a 31-year-old woman from Virginia, who had come to Washington to attend a concert, returned to her room. As she opened the door, Sidner lunged inside. Witnesses heard her scream for help. The door closed. The lights went off. When police arrived, they found Sidner standing in the room with blood on his hands. Christy Bautista was dead on the floor. She had been stabbed 30 times. Sidner claimed he was the victim. The surveillance footage, the forensic evidence, and the testimony of witnesses told a different story. On January 17, 2026, nearly 3 years after the murder, Sidner was sentenced to 40 years in prison. Approximately 100 family members and friends of Christy Bautista attended the hearing, many wearing butterfly hair clips in her honor. George L. Sidner, Jr., was 43 years old on March 31st, 2023. He was from Washington, D.C., though some records indicate he had no fixed address. He had 8 prior convictions and a long history of robbery and assault. Prosecutors said he had a documented pattern of targeting women. At the time of the murder, Sidner was out on release for an armed robbery charge. He had pleaded guilty months earlier to randomly attacking another woman, but he had failed to appear in court for subsequent hearings. A judge had released him despite his criminal history and his failure to comply with court orders. He should have been in custody. Instead, he was free. And on the evening of March 31st, he rode a bicycle to the Ivy City Hotel and killed a stranger. Christy Bautista had graduated from James Madison University in 2018. Talented on the violin and passionate about music and plants, she had taught her younger sisters, Emily and Ashley, how to ride a bike and how to swim. She was their role model. On March 31st, 2023, Christy checked into the Ivy City Hotel at 5:55 p.m. She was in Washington to attend a concert. She had taken what her sister Emily later described as all the right precautions. She had chosen a hotel, locked her door, and gone about her evening. She had no way to know that a man with 8 prior convictions and a history of violence would be listening at her door less than an hour after she checked in. At 6:45 p.m., approximately 50 minutes after Christy checked into room 116, surveillance cameras recorded George Sidner riding a red bicycle into the hotel parking lot. He parked in front of Christy's room. The cameras captured him pausing at her door, leaning close and listening. He waited. When Christy returned to her room or opened the door, Sidner lunged inside. Surveillance audio picked up thudding sounds. A witness heard a woman screaming. Christy yelled for help repeatedly. Then the door closed and the lights in the room went off. Police responded to reports of a woman screaming. When they arrived, they shined a flashlight through the window and saw Sidner with blood on his hands. They entered the room and found Christy Bautista dead on the floor. She had been stabbed at least 30 times, with a total of 30 sharp force injuries, documented by the medical examiner. A large kitchen knife, broken from the force of the attack, was found on one of the beds next to Sidner's jackets. The broken portion of the blade was in a jacket pocket. Sidner claimed he was the victim. Officers arrested him at the scene. Sidner was charged with premeditated first-degree murder while armed, burglary while armed, felony murder while armed, kidnapping while armed, and additional counts. an aggravating circumstance enhancement was added, finding that the crimes were especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel. He was also charged with committing the crimes while on release in another criminal case. He was held without bond. On December 20th, 2023, a grand jury indicted him. An arraignment was scheduled for January 4th, 2024, before Judge Robert Oken. In October 2025, Sidner pleaded guilty to one count of premeditated first-degree murder while armed. The case did not go to trial. On January 17th, 2026, George Sidner appeared before Judge Neil Kravitz in D.C. Superior Court for sentencing. Approximately 100 family members and friends of Christy Bautista attended, some in person and others online. Many wore butterfly hair clips as a tribute to Christy. Sidner appeared in a wheelchair. He had suffered a stroke and was wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs. His head remained down for most of the hearing. Emily and Ashley Bautista gave victim impact statements. Emily said the randomness of the crime was hard to digest. She explained that Christy had taken all the right precautions and had still been killed randomly. She said the family had become a shell of what it was. Ashley said there was nothing anyone could do or say to reverse what had happened. Both sisters described Christy as someone who had been a shining light in their lives. Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Santiago told the court that every woman who finds herself alone has the same nightmare of being suddenly and brutally attacked. She said George Sidner had made that nightmare a reality for Christy Bautista. Sidner's defense attorneys requested a 35-year sentence, citing his poor health, history of drug addiction, and claimed remorse. Sidner addressed the court. He said, "I never intended for this to happen, and I'm terribly sorry." He looked at the judge when he spoke, not at Christy's family. Judge Kravitz sentenced Sidner to 40 years in prison, plus 5 years of supervised release. The judge said the sentence must serve as a message that senseless violence is unacceptable. Christy Bautista played the violin. She loved music and plants and simple things. She had taught her younger sisters to ride bikes and swim. She had taken all the right precautions. The man who killed her should not have been free. He was out on bond for armed robbery. He had pleaded guilty to randomly attacking another woman and had failed to appear in court. A judge had released him. George Sidner rode a bicycle to the Ivy City Hotel, listened at doors, and lunged into Christy's room when she opened the door. The surveillance footage captured his approach. The broken knife on the bed and the blood on his hands proved what he had done. George Sidner, now 46 years old, will not be eligible for release until he is 86. He is incarcerated in Washington, D.C., serving 40 years in prison. The butterfly clips Christy's family wore to his sentencing were a tribute to a woman whose light was extinguished by a man who should have been in a cell. Case 9. Josey G. Rodriguez. In July 2018, a 46-year-old Houston parolee removed his ankle monitor and began a 4-day crime spree that left 3 people dead. Jose Gilberto Rodriguez had a criminal history dating back to 1989 when he was 17 years old. He was a registered sex offender who had recently been released from prison. Days before July 9th, he cut off the electronic monitoring device that was supposed to track his movements. On July 13th, he killed a 62-year-old widow in her home and stole her car. On July 14th, he shot a 28-year-old woman at the mattress store where she worked. On July 16th, he killed a 57-year-old father of 4 at another mattress store. He also shot and robbed a bus driver, who survived. Police arrested Rodriguez on July 17th after a high-speed chase. He was found driving a stolen car with a handgun, believed to have been used in at least 2 of the killings. In December 2023, He pleaded guilty to 3 counts of capital murder and 2 counts of aggravated robbery. He was sentenced to 5 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. José Gilberto Rodriguez was born around 1972. He was 46 years old in July 2018. His criminal record stretched back decades, beginning in 1989 when he was 17. He had been incarcerated multiple times over the years. He was a registered sex offender. In 2018, he was released from prison and placed on parole with an electronic ankle monitor. The monitor was meant to track his location and ensure compliance with the terms of his release. Days before his crime spree began, Rodriguez cut off the ankle monitor. The device that was supposed to alert authorities if he violated his parole lay discarded somewhere while he prepared to kill. Rodriguez's case does not fit the theme of hospitality or maintenance workers. He was not employed in that industry. He was a career criminal who targeted retail workers and committed home invasion. His inclusion in this series is noted for accuracy. Pamela Johnson worked for several years at a Kroger store. A 62-year-old widow who lived in the Cypress area on Bent Pine Drive, she struggled with severe hearing issues, but was beloved in her neighborhood for giving neighbors homemade cookies and reading the Bible. Allie Barrow, 28 years old, worked at a Mattress Firm store on FM 1960 in Houston. She was found by her store manager in the back office around 7 p.m. on July 14th. Eduardo Magana worked at a Mattress One store on the North Freeway near Cross Timbers. A father of 4 from El Salvador, he was 57 years old. All 3 victims were working people doing routine tasks when Rodriguez decided to kill them. The crime spree began with a home invasion on July 9th, 2018, on Foxborough Lane in Harris County. No one was injured in that incident. On Friday, July 13th, Rodriguez went to Pamela Johnson's home on Bent Pine Drive in the Cypress area. He shot and killed her. He stole her PT Cruiser, her television, her computer, and jewelry. He later pawned the television. Her car was found on Saturday, July 14th, in the parking lot of Willowbrook Mall. Mall surveillance footage showed Rodriguez walking through the mall and exiting the opposite side. Other stolen vehicles used during the spree were also dumped at the mall. On Saturday, July 14th, around 7 p.m., Allie Barrow was working at the Mattress Firm store on FM 1960 when Rodriguez entered and shot her in the head. Her body was found by the store manager in the back office, stuffed between mattresses. On Monday, July 16th, around 3 a.m., Rodriguez shot and robbed a 22-year-old Metro Lyft driver in Northeast Houston near Highway 59 and Quitman. The driver survived. Later that same day, Rodriguez went to the Mattress One store on the North Freeway near Cross Timbers and shot and killed Eduardo Magana. He stole Magana's Nissan Sentra. On Tuesday morning, July 17th, at approximately 6 a.m., an alert resident in Northwest Harris County called police to report a suspicious vehicle. Deputy David Reyes responded and spotted a dark gray Nissan Sentra, matching the description that had been circulated by investigators. When Deputy Reyes attempted to stop the vehicle, Rodriguez fled. A high-speed chase ensued. Rodriguez was caught less than a mile from where his crime spree had started. He was arrested in the stolen Nissan Sentra. Inside the car, investigators found a handgun believed to have been used in at least 2 of the killings. Deputy Reyes later said that when he left his house for his shift the night before, he had told his wife, "I'm going to catch him." He did. Rodriguez was charged with 2 capital murder counts for the deaths of Pamela Johnson and Eduardo Magana. A 3rd capital murder charge was filed for the death of Allie Barrow. He was also charged with 2 counts of aggravated robbery. He was held without bond. Rather than go to trial, Rodriguez pleaded guilty. In December 2023, 5 years after the murders, he appeared in court and pleaded guilty to 3 capital murder charges and 2 aggravated robbery charges. He agreed to accept a sentence of 5 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Assistant District Attorney Samantha Knecht said the hearts of the prosecution team went out to all of the families of the victims and the surviving victims. Rodriguez, who was 51 years old at the time of his guilty plea, was sentenced to 5 life terms. He will never be released from prison. Pamela Johnson gave neighbors cookies and read her Bible. Allie Barrow was working at a mattress store when her manager found her body. Eduardo Magana was supporting his 4 children. 3 people were killed during a 4-day rampage by a man who had been released from prison and had cut off his ankle monitor. The electronic device meant to track him lay discarded while he shot and stabbed and stole. The surveillance footage from Willowbrook Mall, the stolen vehicles, and the handgun found in the car when he was arrested all connected the crimes. Deputy Reyes told his wife he would catch Rodriguez, and he did. Jose Gilberto Rodriguez, now 53 years old, will die in Texas prison. Rodriguez will never walk free. The families of Pamela Johnson, Allie Barrow, and Eduardo Magana will live the rest of their lives without the people he killed. Case 10. Xavier Deon Jones. The night auditor at a Drury Inn in St. Louis, Missouri, worked the overnight shift, the hours when the hotel was at its quietest and guests were asleep in their rooms. Xavier Deon Jones was 24 years old and held a position that required trust. Night auditors typically work from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., balancing the day's accounts, managing the front desk, and responding to any guest needs that arise during the night. The position also comes with access to guest rooms, hotel safes, and security systems. Jones used that access to commit robbery. The robbery escalated into murder. A guest named Gladys Cook, who had been staying at the hotel, was killed. Investigators found Jones's fingerprints on the safe in her room and DNA, evidence from a physical struggle. He was convicted of murder in the mid-1990s and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He remains incarcerated in Missouri's state prison system. Xavier Deon Jones worked as a night auditor at the Drury Inn in St. Louis, Missouri. The night audit shift is the overnight position at hotels, typically covering the hours when most guests are asleep and the building is quiet. Night auditors are responsible for balancing the day's financial transactions, preparing reports for management, checking in late arrivals, and addressing any guest concerns that arise during the night. The position requires access to the front desk systems, guest information, and often master keys to guest rooms. Jones exploited his position and access to target a guest. Details about his personal background, education, and prior criminal history are not available in public records, but his actions revealed a willingness to betray the trust placed in him. Gladys Cook was staying at the Drury Inn as a long-term guest or resident. Many hotels offer extended stay arrangements for people who need temporary housing, and long-term guests often store valuables in their rooms. Details about Cook's age, occupation, hometown, and reason for staying at the hotel are not available in public records. What is documented is that she was a guest at the hotel where Jones worked, and that she became the victim of a robbery that turned into murder. During Jones's night shift, he accessed Gladys Cook's room. The motive appears to have been robbery. The room had a safe, which suggests Cook had valuables she was attempting to secure. Jones accessed the safe. His fingerprints were later found on it, which proved he had touched it. At some point during the robbery, a physical struggle occurred. DNA evidence from the struggle was recovered and linked to Jones. The robbery escalated into a fatal assault. Cook was killed. The The specific method of her death and the detailed sequence of events are not available in public records. But the forensic evidence, fingerprints on the safe, and DNA from a physical altercation established that Jones had been in her room and had been involved in the events that led to her death. Investigators from the St. Louis Police Department processed the crime scene after Cook's body was discovered. The fingerprints on the safe provided critical evidence. Fingerprint analysis matched the prints to Jones, proving that he had handled the safe in Cook's room. DNA evidence was also recovered from the scene, indicating that there had been a physical struggle between Jones and Cook. The combination of fingerprint and DNA evidence linked Jones directly to the crime. In the 1990s, DNA technology was becoming more widely used in criminal investigations, and the evidence collected in this case was sufficient to connect Jones to the murder. He was arrested and charged with murder. The case proceeded through the Missouri court system. Jones was tried for murder, and prosecutors presented the forensic evidence to the jury or judge. The fingerprints on the safe demonstrated that Jones had accessed it, and the DNA evidence from the struggle proved his involvement in the assault. The case was resolved in 1995, when Jones was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Specific details about the trial, including the names of the judge, prosecutors, and defense attorneys, as well as the exact dates of the trial and sentencing, are not available in public records. Many procedural details about this case, including exact dates, locations, and procedural specifics, are not publicly documented. What is known is that a night auditor at a Drury Inn in St. Louis betrayed his overnight access to commit robbery, that the robbery turned into murder, and that forensic evidence, fingerprints on a safe and DNA from a struggle, proved his guilt. Gladys Cook was a guest at a hotel, relying on the security of a locked door and a safe to protect her belongings. The night auditor who had access to her room turned that access into a weapon. The position that was supposed to ensure guest safety became the tool of her murder. The fingerprints and DNA that Jones left behind ensured that he would spend the rest of his life in prison. If Xavier Deon Jones was 24 years old when convicted in 1995, he would be approximately 54 years old now, still serving his life sentence in Missouri.